Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and here with Mike Simmons and Mike Connor. Mike and Mike, this week I want to talk about transparency, or more particular, like a culture of transparency. It's almost these days a buzzword to be transparent, but I want to look at it from your aspect in sales. Is a culture of transparency beneficial to a sales team?
I think it depends. Some people want transparency, but they're not ready for it. There's value in having a buffer and being able to buffer between you and others inside an organization. There's value in being able to keep focused on your day-to-day job. I mean, what's the NFL Films thing that they did with the Patriots? It's do your job. So I think it depends. Transparency sounds good conceptually, but sometimes be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, and I think, Jody, you're right to say that it's very in vogue right now. I mean, you hear about that when I look at companies, and that's one of the values that they talk about. Oh, we've got full transparency. And I worked for a company that professed complete transparency. And the reality is there really wasn't clear transparency. There was transparency about certain things, but not necessarily complete transparency. And I actually think it's kind of a fallacy to think that you're ever going to be part of an organization that is going to have just complete transparency. I've seen some wild examples where I can't remember the name of the company, but there was somebody that posted all of their salaries for all of their employees. And they did that in the spirit of full transparency. And really then they realized, maybe having that information out there in the spirit of full transparency wasn't a great idea because it upset a lot of people. And in fact, it probably upset an awful lot of the people. So really, what did they gain by doing that? They got some great press coverage because they could say we're a completely transparent organization, but there's a reality of why some information where you can cross a line and too much information can become a bad thing. And so, yeah, is transparency good? I interpret that to mean be honest with me. Tell me what I need to know so that I can contribute to my organization or that I can be successful. It means telling me things that will make sure that I don't fail or what have you, but I don't need to know every little detail because if nothing else, then I'm starting to think about or worry about things that take my attention away from what I should be focused on.
Well, and transparency works both ways. I mean, there's to keep it focused on sales rep as an example. We want more transparency into individual team members' pipeline and forecast. The greater amount of transparency, the more predictable the revenue stream may be. But as you start to get into the details and the minutia of what can happen inside individual deals or inside individual client relationships, you realize I don't really need all of that detail. Just give me the high points that allow me to do my job as a sales leader. I'd look at it the same way. I want to make sure that my team has enough information in order to do their job and stay focused, because their focus on their role in the business is what's critical to our success. And as you build up a level of trust between you and the members of your team, then I think transparency goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
So whether you know the individual details of everything that goes on or not, you still feel like you're part of an organization that's transparent because people are going to tell you things like it is.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Trust is definitely the thing that determines how much transparency you think you need. When you're working in an environment or working with a team that, you don't trust your leader, the leader doesn't trust his team, all those things, then that drives that curiosity and that need for, I need more transparency. And what that says is I need to know what's really going on. And I need you to be straight with me and tell me what's happening. And then when that trust isn't there, then little things like, and I'm just having a flashback of a time when I worked in an office where the manager had a private office and the rest of us kind of sat out in a bullpen. And you couldn't imagine productivity, how it went down to like zero anytime his door closed. And we would all sit there and be like, oh my gosh, I wonder what Lee's talking about right now. I wonder which one of us is in trouble. I wonder what's going on. I wonder if Lee's in trouble. I wonder if our blah, blah, blah. I mean, they fill in the blank with all kinds of ridiculous things. And now that I've been on the other side of that door, a lot of times, maybe Lee was just really busy and he didn't want to be distracted, so he closed his door. So sometimes it turns out to be a whole lot of nothing. But when you don't have trust in a culture and people feel like, well, the first thing they ask for is more and more transparency. And I think in a lot of cases, leaders feel like that they need to overshare information with their teams because they see that as a sign of building trust with their teams. And I think you can get yourself in a little bit of a dilemma there because you might overshare and you might give information that maybe they don't have the full context of the situation that you're talking about. And then all of a sudden they become very worried about this information they've just received, which then leads to really a distraction, more or less, where now they're not focused on the things they need to focus on. Like your job as a leader is to be able to shoulder some of the things that you just don't want to let roll downhill. And you do that because that's sort of your job, is to buffer some of that, to decide what will benefit that person and build trust and build a positive relationship, and then what you could be doing that would actually overwhelm them.
I worked with a retired Army colonel, and he would talk about what leaders do. They provide guidance, direction, and motivation. And I think as a leader, you run a pretty big risk when you start jumping to conclusions based on information that's shared with you. And you run a pretty big risk when you think that your team may or may not jump to conclusions based on information you share with them. So I'm going to take this more from the individual contributor perspective, but as an individual contributor, when you're asking for that transparency, is that for you or is that for the good of the organization? Is that a selfish mode that you're getting into? Or is it because you really want to make an impact on the success, the long-term success of the business? If it's about the business and it's less about you and it's not from a selfish motivation, then have that conversation in the right place at the right time with the people involved. And through the trust that you build up over time, or through that trust that you create, those will be very productive discussions. And a lot of innovation can happen based on those kind of conversations. If it comes from the standpoint of, I'm trying to catch somebody in a trap, or I'm trying to do something different, or I'm really just focused on myself, then you really got to ask yourself, is that the right discussion? And are you as transparent with the organization as you expect them to be with you?
No, and I've had a job where a supervisor kind of had the attitude where you'll know what you need to know. You've got this position. You don't need to know the things I need to know. And right. Perhaps he was coming from the standpoint you are, but put it out there in a way that it seemed a little degrading to the other people that weren't given all the knowledge. How do you balance that? That, look, I'm giving you what you need to know to do your job and not have it seem like you're one of those guys?
I mean, that's even worse than what I described, because what I said was, really, as a leader, you need to be able to absorb things, and you need to be able to process things, and you need to be able to share information that is beneficial to that team member that's working for you. That's actually the worst scenario, which is, I've got information right now that I just can't share. It's almost like a power grab thing. Like, I'm in control. I have knowledge. It's like telling somebody, I've got a secret about somebody, but I can't tell you. I mean, I can't see an upside of just telling somebody, don't worry your pretty little head. I don't know. That seems like a horrible way to instill confidence in somebody that's relying on you to provide the direction for their success.
That brings back a conference call I was on about some kind of process inside an organization. And I actually had someone say, "Don't worry your pretty little head." And I thought, wow, they think I'm pretty. It's one of those things where if you use information for the purpose of controlling people around you, then how do you expect that team to grow and thrive and be creative and innovate and be successful? There's a difference between withholding information for the purpose of control versus withholding information because it's incomplete. And it really is just going to add a whole layer of noise to the conversation that person or that group of people don't necessarily need to be involved in. We're in a meeting with someone, it wasn't that long ago, and actually had them look across the table and ask me not to ask questions around the team because it passes on the impression that I don't agree with what's going on. And I thought, holy crap, is that a you problem or is that a me problem? But anyhow, it's amazing how these things can come up. And the I would just bring it back to that piece around is, why are you asking for the transparency? Is it because you don't trust or you think there's something else going on there? And if that's the case, maybe it's the wrong, I know we've talked about this before about relationships, but maybe it's the wrong relationship to be a part of. So,
well, I think we have an interesting case here around this topic because you two started Catalyst Sale after long careers, one of you longer than the other, and you've seen...
Thanks, Jody.
You've seen transparency played out in different ways in companies, but here you started your own and you can build your own culture of transparency. So how did you approach that? And were you deliberate in the way you handled transparency?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're doing a great job at it, to be perfectly honest with you, Jody. I think it's challenging when you have a small company and you need people. The first thing you need is you need everybody to understand what the vision and the mission of what we're trying to achieve as a company, what that looks like, what's in our heads. Mike and I talk every day. We bounce ideas off each other every day. And I think we can take for granted that they're doing a job for us and they're doing well and they have their own challenges. But we forget how fast we're moving, and that for somebody that's in our company that's wondering kind of, hey, what's going on with Mike and Mike? It's tough because you have a balance there where we're saying we don't need them to have the same challenges we have every day with trying to figure out our business. And as quickly as it's moving, we need them to be able to focus and excel on the job that they've been given. I think with the Patriots, Belichick has a great example of, just everybody just do your job. And if everybody just does their job, you trust that your other team members are doing their part. And we know we want to win the game, but you don't have your kicker trying to figure out all the pass plays and the pass routes on behalf of Brady. I mean, it's just kind of the same thing, but that may have been a horrible example, but it's really about, we know that every job we have in our company is important and we know that it contributes to the overall success of Catalyst Sale. But the thing we might take for granted once in a while is that they don't always connect those dots. We can see the bigger picture. We understand where we're going and how important they are. But the second that they start to feel like, wow, I'm just doing this job and I don't see how it's, boiling up to the overall success of where we're headed, like I start to feel a little disconnected, that's when we kind of have to do a little bit of a check and say, okay, we've got to make sure that we at least let them know how they're connected, how we're doing, and not just take for granted that everybody is just doing their role and not worried about the bigger thing. Because, in a small company and a startup, there's a lot of risk with that. And we just have to know that they don't have maybe the same feeling about taking a lot of risk like we did as founders, but at the same time, we just have to be careful of it. So it's something that you have to just work on constantly.
Yeah, and I think Mike really hit it on the head when he said it's something that we at times we might do well, but at other times we do well. The side that I think we do pretty well with is the trust. There's a lot of trust that's there, but you got to be careful about leaning too heavily on that trust as a way to avoid being as transparent. And I think that's an area where we'll continue to work on and get better with. There are times where Mike and I can complete each other's sentences. We kind of know where we've worked with each other long enough. We know where we're at. We know what our focus is. But as you start to push that out to the team and start to decentralize some of the decision-making that needs to be made in the organization, it's really important that the team on the whole understand the mission and intent. Again, another military term, commander's intent. Does the team understand where we're going, why we're going there, how they fit into that? Because if they do, they can be much more creative in their approach to addressing challenges and day-to-day things that come up and not feel like they're just a cog in a wheel. We're a nimble startup. We like to think that we're nimble. We're a startup and we can't afford to have cogs in the wheel. We've got to have engagement, improvement, innovation driving this thing.
All right. This has been a great discussion about transparency and creating a culture of transparency. As we wind this one down, what are your final thoughts on transparency?
I kind of feel like I just went through a therapy session.
Yeah. I think the phrase TMI comes to mind, too much information. There are cases where, too much information can really create problems. And just knowing how to balance that, the right information at the right time to drive the right sort of reaction and also support in whatever it is that you're doing. but just being aware of the fact that there are times when you might overshare and be ready to have some pretty honest discussions if you create concerns.
Yeah. And I mean, Mike hit on it a couple of times here, but timing is really important. I mean, there's a time and a place for those things. So in that instance where I'm asking questions, many of those questions are on the benefit or for the benefit of the entire team. It's information, it's getting clarification. There are things where in that instance, I would expect there were other people who were in the room who had a similar question. If you think you're the only person in the room who has that question, maybe you should wait and take the person aside and have that as a one-on-one discussion with someone. So just make sure the timing's right when you're asking a lot of those questions, because it's a lot easier to be transparent and provide the right context in a one-on-one discussion than it is an entire group. I mean, heck, you look at the age gap between Mike and I, you got to communicate differently to me than you do to him.
Well, this has been a great look at transparency. Thanks so much, Mike and Mike. And if you want to find out more about Catalyst Sale and what we're up to, you can do so at catalystsale.com. So thanks again, Mike and Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.